makers on um, uh, environmental environmental
Okay.
issues. Sorry.
Okay, we are going to be live now, and let me. Oh. Okay, we hang on a second. Let me just okay, we started.
Okay, I have the link. I have the link. Now.
You have the link, right? Can you
Yes.
tweet it? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now we live.
Yeah, we are live. Hang on a second. Let me just post this link on my Facebook. I have a few people on my Facebook as well. I need to type the foresee dialogue on Indonesia and West Papua. Okay. All right. Welcome to foresee dialogue on democratic movements across Southeast Asia. I am Zarni, and I am hosting this very important and timely discussion with some of the very best, scholars, journalists, and activists working on Indonesia and West Papua. I have with me on our YouTube series, Ronny Kareni, a well-known West Papuan musician, trained in diplomatic studies at the Australian National University and based in Canberra. He is using music as a cultural movement for his people's right to self-determination. Then I've got Febriana Firdaus, one of a kind Indonesian journalist who has spoken out and written extensively on and made a documentary about West Papuan peoples, essentially colonial status in her Indonesian. She is Indonesian, but she stands for the wretched of West Papua. She has just finished making a documentary called Our Mother's Land, and she will be speaking about that documentary after Ronny. And then we've got a very well-known Indonesian woman leader, a feminist, a scholar, an activist, former MP, Nursyahbani. She will be joining us from The Hague, where she is, and she has recently, actually last year, been awarded honorary doctorate from the School of Oriental and African Studies for her outstanding contributions to scholarship and activism. She is one of a very, very few prominent Indonesian women or Indonesians, period, who has attempted to start a public dialogue on the genocides, two genocides in 1965, genocide against the Chinese Indonesians and the genocide against the communists and left-wing activists trying to democratize Indonesia when Suharto came to power. That was in 1965, and it has never been recognized by the international community as such, much less in the country by the Indonesian society at large. And then we've got the fifth and final speaker, a very distinguished Dutch scholar based in The Hague, emerita professor at the University of Amsterdam, written 30 books on women's rights, sexual rights, and human rights, Saskia Wieringa. And so let me go to Ronny in Canberra first. Ronnie, can you tell us what your people have been going through since the 1960s when Indonesia declared that West Papuan, people wanted Indonesia to be basically the ruler of West Papua in a referendum. The 1,000 plus people, West Papuan people, were handpicked by Indonesian state, and they declared that they wanted to be part of Indonesia. That's out of 500,000 West Papuan. I understand that West Papua is very, very rich, and there are corporations such as Freeport McMoran. There were atrocities committed by TNI, the Indonesian Armed Forces. So, Ronnie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zani. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to pay respect to the Ngunnawal people of the area that I live and work in, Canberra, as First Nation people and Indigenous people, like my people in West Papua as Indigenous people. Our sovereignty never ceded, and we will continue to fight to defend our land as well as the dignity of our people. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I'm humbled as well here to be amongst amazing panelists here and speakers. And as you pointed out in terms of West Papua self-determination struggle, 3 areas that I wanted to touch here. Basically, one would be around the legal and political status, and then the civil and political force in West Papua that continues to aspire for the rights of that self-determination, and thirdly, my role within that through cultural diplomacy. So with no further ado, with West Papua context, as you already in the introduction mentioned, West Papua, it's a matter of legal and political status. And this is right at the outset when Indonesia, after the proclamation of its independence in 45 and gained recognition in 49, Indonesia fought tirelessly in the 50s to reclaim what under the principle of uti possidetis, where using the military force to claim the other non-self-governing territory under the Dutch. So it eventuated on the 19th day of December 1961, and that is just after West Papua raised our Morning Star flag and recognized by the Dutch, and as well as the national anthem and the independent Republic of West Papua. So this year we just marked its 59th anniversary. And this is something that many West Papuans will continue to hold dear in our hearts and minds. And this conflict, it has gone into the 3rd generation now, and it will be an intergenerational conflict. Whether Jakarta likes it or not, any West Papuans you speak to or you talk to are born into this conflict, including myself and those who are coming up after us. And basically what we are calling, it's based on the legal status. Firstly, the manner in which Indonesia came to occupy, that brutal occupation that begins in the early 60s. After 4 attempts they did in 50s and failed miserably at the UN to secure that vote. And so what they did, they have to do that the 19th of December, the Trikora operation, and then use the Cold War period to really put a stamp onto the claim of the territory, which was done through the New York Agreement in 62, and then the annexation in 63, and followed by the geopolitical and strategic interest within that 60s. So even including Freeport McMoran, which you highlighted or pointed out earlier, signed an agreement in 67. This is 2 years prior to the so-called Act of Free Choice in 1969. The rest is history, and this is the darkest history of one of the last frontier wars that is fighting in the issue of colonization within the Pacific region, although it's more east to the Southeast Asia, but within the Pacific, it is and continues to remain an issue that the colonization, eradication of colonialism is not over yet. And so this is why it comes to why there is continued the civil and political force, which my second point, the uprising of various political movements, and it started off in the armed resistance, and then it moves into the civil resistance in the late 1990s into early 2000. And this is early 2000 saw that shift of and also uprising of the civil resistance and led by mostly students, youth movement. And this is when we saw the rise of KNPB in mid 2007, as well as SONA MAPA, it's the Solidarity Student National Movement, Alliance Mahasiswa Papua, it's the Alliance Papuan National Student Movement that has base across Indonesian universities. And now we've got another front, which is the Free WP or Front Rakyat Indonesia for West Papua. So these are our civil or moral force that continues to come out in numbers, mobilizing, organizing peaceful demonstrations. And we've seen countless numbers of youths and activists being arbitrarily detained, even extrajudicial killing, and even many facing death sentence. Some have disappeared, and these are our brightest and brightest minds of West Papuan.
Can I just stop you there for 1 second? Because your struggle isn't like isolated. You recently co-authored a piece that with one of your lawyers, linking Black Lives Matter movement and how that inspired or affected or is connected with your struggle. Tell us about that. Black Lives Matter, the connection, and why you think you are a separate nation that deserves or that is seeking the rights to self-determination. Yeah.
Thank you. So culturally and ethnically, West Papuans are Melanesians. So our kinship system are more towards the people of Papua New Guinea, Solomon Island, Fiji, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Kanaki, even as far as the northern far Queensland, the people of Torres Strait Island. So that is a clear indication of that, the ethnicity, and then the cultural connection that is more towards the people within Melanesia.
That's why you were referred to in a very racist term by the Indonesian majority as monkeys. Am I correct?
That's correct, and this is not new. This has been since the occupation. One of our national soccer team called Persipura, over the years, many of the players have been called monkeys just to go into a stadium in parts of Indonesia, but it hasn't really come to the surface. It has been suppressed until last year with the Surabaya incident with the Papuan students, and then that was caught on camera. So that was one of the biggest difference with this systemic racism, but also everyday experience of being called monkey, and those other slurs. But this time it was caught. So 2019, it was caught on camera and it went viral. And this is the same case with what happened with George Floyd. It was caught on camera and it went viral. And so in the context of West Papua in 2019, that really bring an uprising. So there was that West Papua uprising for 2 weeks. But quickly, the state came in and shut down the communication and even forcefully dispersed any peaceful protest. But to that, it was one of the biggest mobilization and organization of peaceful demonstration in calling against systemic racism through that incident. But what is really spark out of the George Floyd incident is that many of the netizens throughout Indonesia were also sympathizing with what was happening in the US. But then it raises the question of within Indonesia, racism also exists, and in the case of West Papua. So that generates that conversation again, and students throughout various universities organized webinars to discuss about Papuan Lives Matter hashtag, which was inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, which was already back then. I remember I involved in the Black Lives Matter in 2015 when I was down in Melbourne, and that was already when the co-founders already kind of like that hashtag by those two founders, female, and then to see that, revisit that in 2020 and 2019 last year, but then this year was because of George Floyd incident was caught on camera. So we make a stand basically for West Papuans that for us, when we were called monkeys through that incident in Surabaya with the Papuan students, the word monkey unified the people. And we took to the streets, and that really galvanized that massive support and really holding on to that position that yes, we are not Indonesia, which is defined under the Indonesian constitution. We are Melanesians, ethnically, culturally, but because of that word monkey, it has unified us through that word and really demonstrated in our peaceful demonstrations.
Yeah, can I the whole you just there and to invite Febriana to come in, because here you have an Indonesian sister who shows great solidarity and human spirit with the people that are not her people, but through this solidarity. And she has been speaking out on this, and she has written extensively on the issue of essentially joint economic rape of your basically your nation, West Papua, between the TNI, the Indonesian Armed Forces, and Western corporations. Febriana, you travel extensively and interview so many West Papuan people. You published in the Time, New York Times, Guardian, and other places on this issue. Can you tell us? Can you give us a clearer picture of this corporate military exploitation, and why this is a colonial situation, or no different from the old Dutch or British or French colonial period, and the system that was set up to benefit the colonizer, not the population that really are the owners of gold and teak and rubber and whatnot.
Yeah. I just did a research for my next article about the internet freedom in West Papua, and by coincidence, I read about my editor asking about the how much that the West Papuans earns in a day, in average, and I just knew it's only like 10 US dollar, I think. No, not 10 US dollar. It's very low compared to another islands in Indonesia. And then the economy is still rely on the free port. So it means that they have so much power to control the government here and even Jakarta. And imagine it's the natural resources of West Papuans that they actually occupy that grassberg and then
What do
expel the villager.
what do West Papuan people have in terms of natural resources? Gas,
Oh,
oil, others?
Gold, of course, gold. So in the highland, you know that so many conflict in the highland between Lani Jaya and then even Duga right now. So it's source of the gold. It's source of the gold. I have this research in 2018 on natural resources for Mongabai, and I get the data official from the local government, and I know exactly where is the map of the gold. It's lying. The map of the gold natural resources is lying across the conflict zone in West Papua. So there is always like shooting there, and then people get
Who
expelled
who
from
is
the
who is
village.
doing the shootings, and who's being
In
shot at?
Indonesian military and the national police, of course, the Indonesian government always released their own version that they say it's the rebel army, but the people in the village in West Papua always say that it's not the rebel army but the Indonesian military, for example. So there is always like a two version when there is a shooting here, and usually the national media will quote the Indonesian military and national police only. Only like a small number of media in Indonesia doing this investigation. So 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 yeah, if you talk about natural resources, it's not only gold, but also gas, but also coal. My latest investigation in 2018 that West Papua has like better quality of coal than Borneo. Imagine that Borneo is very famous with the coal mining, but West Papua has this better quality of coal. So it's actually very rich island. And then but if you see that every day I still see like West Papuan like we call it like mama Papua. They still sell their goods like on the floor compared to the like migrant who have like they have like kiosks, for example, or like a small shop. But West Papuan cannot compete with this migrant because they don't have like source, they don't have like access to the economic source. They don't even have access to their natural resources because occupied by so many multinational companies here and also national company. And when I was in Yahukimo, for example, I knew that our former Vice President Yusuf Kala, their family have like a mining company that I heard it's gold company. So it's gold mining company. It's new. It's just started in Yahukimo. I did an investigation, but I didn't write that one because I focused on coal. So many things, but it's the gap of economic here between the we call it orang asli Papua or indigenous West Papuan and the migrant. It's very like it's very high the gap. So that's what I witness here until today. It's been like 5 years. I travel a lot. Every year I come back here and write a story, and then I still see like no development.
Right. And, I see a very real parallel between what Indonesia, political class, as well as the maybe like cronies and outside multinational corporations coming in, essentially sucking everything valuable off the ground, on the ground, while pauperizing or like impoverishing the native inhabitants. That is happening in my own country of Burma as well. Like, as you know, Rohingya Muslims, Kachins in the north that they sit on jade mines. There are a lot of conflict. So whenever there is a military presence or military dictatorship or military backed political system, you've got this marriage of convenience between multinational corporations hungry for resources for their own economic productions and profit, and the racist national military forces. And then you've got this middle political class that make the marriage, matchmaking, like inviting outside corporations to come in and exploit everything of value while providing protection and security, not to the local communities that they say that they are a part of, but for the corporate interest. Yeah. So we've got the same parallel here in West Papua's case. You just made and released, this documentary called Our Mother's Land, the first week of November, right? Can you tell us what that documentary is about and what you want to accomplish with that, and what the viewers might be able to do to support as acts of solidarity for West Papuan self-determination?
Okay, first about Our Mother's Land. So I did a research for like I think uh 4 years. No, it's not 4 years. It's 3 years. Sorry, since 2016. Uh, After there is like a group of female farmer from Central Java. They set their feet into cement in front of to protest to protest and against the giant cement factory that will destroy the environment. So they like cement their feet in front of the presidential palace. So it's a big event in Indonesia because we have never seen something like that. So they call themselves Kartini Kendang, and it's in 2016. So that even inspired me to do further research about the group, another group of maybe farmer or whatever. But my focus is at that time I saw like a phenomenon that so many female uh, farmer or like so many women at the forefront defend their environment. So my focus at that time is to do a research on the female land defenders or environmentalists who are on the front and defend their land. So that's how it started. And then after I met my editor, and then we agreed to make a documentary film, and that's why I travel across Indonesia. But actually it's included it includes West Papuan, Mama Josefa Alomang, but because of the security reason, and it's hard for the foreigner because I'm working with so many journalists and videographer or filmmaker from the UK, because it's funded by Gecko Project, which is based in UK. They cannot enter West Papua, so we have to drop that story on the Mama Yosepa Alomang, but we promise to cover that story later. If we find a way to fly him into West Papua. So that's how that story about female defender in my uh, and then it's appear in my film, and then and 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 it's actually it's actually the problem right now in Indonesia, not only in West Papua but other part of Indonesia also experience um, how do you call it, like massive exploitation of our natural resources. And then the woman uh, were like the most impacted community or the most vulnerable community impacted by the project or the exploitation is the woman and the children. That's why that's the main character in my film. And yeah, it's about the film and how to help the West Papuan community. That's the second question, right?
Yes.
I think Karoni can can answer that question because he knows exactly how to help. but there are so many. But I will give like a advice to connect with the church in West Papua.
And then
They have done
you
so
also
many
have
great
the
work.
sorry, you also have this website or news site that you establish and run called the Voice of West Papua, right? So people can
Yes, yes,
go
yes.
and get the updates, subscribe to your newsletter, and
Yeah. Also, Karoni also have another newsletter. So there are like two newsletter in about West Papua in English. Karoni can introduce the newsletter as well. I
yeah,
think so many right now, not only West Papua, but we are going to update. It's been like so long because I've been busy with my investigation here. But
yeah.
Karoni maybe can explain where we can help the West Papuan. I will recommend everyone here to connect with the Pendeta Benigiai or Price Benigiai. He is like one of the church leader here from the Gereja Kingmi in West Papua. But maybe Karoni have another recommendation.
Yeah, Ronnie, like come in here. This is appropriate, and also like tell us a bit more about how you use music as a cultural movement. Yeah, to shift the consciousness around your colonial conditions, and then I
Thank you.
will go to the new our sister new who's waiting to comment on the status of democratization or regression of democracy as is becoming clear. And now, Ronnie, please.
Quickly, yes, thank you very much. In regards to following up in terms of that film, Our Mother's Land, and connecting with how people can support that film, one thing that, yeah, very important is two things. The role of journalists in West Papua to report facts that is coming out so that it's not biased, but factual reporting remains a big challenge. And for Papuan activists that requires legal aid to support their cases when they got or like when they are arbitrarily detained, they always need that legal aid support, which the legal aid are limited in their resources and capacity. So some of the things we're doing, whether it's journalist work or legal advocacy, it's to support the capacity of people on the ground to be able to be that voice, and they have that capacity to continue to do what they do on the ground in terms of advocacy and writing. Um, Advice on like the Voice of West Papua, the newsletter, um, two Papuan local media, Suara Papua, which is literally, yeah, translated the Voice of West Papua. Suara Papua is an independent media run by the Papuans, and Tabloid Jubi, which has an English daily version that updates on facts and what's happening on the ground. I recommend them, those two local media, for people to follow up to get an update. But also more importantly is how we to support and build that connection and solidarity or partnership with local journalists, Papuan journalists, which I'm sure Sister Febriana can also make contact to direct who are our journalists on the ground that they can build this partnership. And so then that will help to produce films, short documentaries, or whatever within those capacity that people can help to contribute. Within my role as a musician, one thing I see it's important is the cultural identity of the people of the land. And so from the island of New Guinea, from west, there's the Sorong on the western end, and right across to the east it's Samarai. So these two towns very much on the opposite end. The band I co-established with another brother from Papua New Guinea. We call it Sorong Samarai. So it's reframing the island, and it's about the people. that we are one people, we share one kinship system, we share the language, even the tifa, what we call the drum, that is very distinct to the Melanesian culture. So we follow that through our song lines, bloodlines, and that sound connects us. And so we established this band Sorong Samurai. There's a YouTube clip of the song Sorong Samurai. I recommend people, or I can drop it here in the chat if our viewers, just to check it out. And that is critically important. Basically, for us, it's about self-determination of our people. It's that we're really creating that who we are, what we are. And it's also in the context of not that I'm born in West Papua, but Papua is in me. It's born in me. So wherever I go, I represent Papua. I represent that place of belonging. So that's the power of music, and it's we use that as a weapon of choice, as a medium, as a conduit to really spread the word and awareness raising, and building solidarity as well. And within the Southeast Asia, I think we haven't really done much tour, but we've done a lot in Australia and to the Pacific. But it's a hope and dream that one day we could use their music and its cultural, contemporary, all together fusion that
Yes.
we use.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Sorry,
you.
Zarni.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is something important that I think Kak Ronny has to add, and it's connected to my film. So if you notice in my film, I wore a T-shirt written in the back "Mambesak." So it has very strong message because I couldn't go to West Papua. Mambesak is a band, a famous band in West Papua. And I want Karoni to tell a story about why Mambesak band, or like his vocalist like Arnold Up is very important on the independence struggle, and why music is very effective, and Indonesian think that it's a national threat.
Indeed, just quickly on that note, so Arno Lap, who is West Papua's musicologist, anthropologist, and in the 60s, he went around to collect songs when he realized that the cultural identity of Papuans through language, the songs, the dance are critical. And so through his group called Mambesak, they went around, collected and archiving songs um, for the Cendrawasih University. But during that process, what became evident is that the power of music itself, unite, really brings that spirit of nationalism in the liberation struggle. And of course, that make them become the threat to the state. And some of the songs reflects about survival. Songs also reflect about continuation of the 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 cultural practice, the way of life. And by the time he was, Anolap and his other colleagues were already detained in prison, he still continues to write songs. And one of his last songs that he wrote while he was in prison, he recorded it in reel-to-reel tape and smuggled it through a prison guard to give it to his wife. It's called Hidup Ini Suatu Misteri. That's in Bahasa, loosely translated into English is life full of mystery. He poetically puts these together and really describe the lives of the Papuan people, which I can just quickly say that poem. It's in Bahasa, but I'm going to try and quickly in English. So it goes like this. This is the life full of mystery. You can't imagine, neither foresee. This is how it is, the reality. Yeah. So that's the essence of that message, which he continues to say, andai saja. So just like an eagle flying on high, searching below, but what a pity the unlucky fate, only to be hunted by the hunters and killed. And then what I dream for, what I wait for, nothing else, only freedom.
Well,
Thank
that's
you.
very beautiful and
Yeah, yay.
inspiring. And yeah, of course, like art and music have always been a part of any national liberation struggles across history and geographic spaces. Let me bring the sister Nursyahbani. She has been working on her own country's democratizations, protection of women, the women's equality in a very essentially conservative society, and also the society that refuses to look itself in the mirror, past and present. Like West Papuan situation is unfolding today, and the genocides that took place in 1965, they have not been processed in any way, shape, or form in the form of national truth and reconciliation. So, Sister Nu, can you give an overview of what The Economist and other research and media organization call regression in democracy? And Jokowi has just won a second term, and I've been reading news about Jokowi maybe pursuing a dynastic ambition, encouraging the son and son-in-law to enter politics, and also you've got increased political repression against journalists and other civil society activists, while his administration that was welcomed by the world has failed to make any improvement or take any actions against atrocities against human rights defenders. Oh, you are muted. You need to unmute.
Yeah, there are many friends that want to join, but you didn't approve yet.
Oh, well, you invited Indonesian activists to come on the discussion?
Yeah, all my colleagues from Legal Aid Foundation alumni.
Oh, I saw Melanie,
Yes.
and because
Yes.
ask him to come back, and when Saskia finishes her overview, and then we could have a lively exchange with them. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But please tell them. I saw it, but I thought it was some hackers coming. That's why I didn't. I'm afraid of hackers.
Maybe
Okay.
can send the YouTube link first, Bu Nur.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, tell them to come back. I can see a few knocking on the door, but because I was not
So
aware
crazy.
that they're coming, so that's why I did not let them in. So because
Yeah,
I don't want all of us to get hacked and then the show stopped,
yeah, I couldn't join in the first 15 minutes because you didn't approve me as well.
Oh, my apologies again. And so carry on. I will give you extra minutes now.
No, that's okay. Yeah, thank you, Sunny. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss about regression of democracy in Indonesia. And it is true, if we look at the democracy index that launched recently, Indonesia is declined, I think. I forget the number, but it's declined. And there are many scholars who writes about Indonesian democracy, saying that Indonesia considered as illiberal democracy because the election is a free election and peaceful, but the winner, in this case, President Jokowi, managed his administration so repressive in a repressive way. Yeah, and this morning I even like it's very funny to read in Compass his statement that he said that yeah, we have to fulfill human rights and solve the past human rights violation. Oh my God, like, what kind of statement this is. And many human rights activists reacted to this empty statement. Yeah, in 80s, as legal aid worker at the time, I have been back and forth to Papua to provide human rights training for students, for advocates, and so on. There, 80s until 90s, and I saw the gap is very like 100 to 0. If we compare to other Indonesian people, to Papuan people. But after Reformasi, when we discuss about the special autonomy in Papua, like I have hope that that will increase the welfare of West Papuan. Even at the time, it's a hot debate in DPR about the special autonomy and special budget for West Papua, because some very narrow nationalists didn't agree. Even they said that because we have to control Papua, there's many resources there, not only gold, coal, but also uranium. That's after gold is over, and then uranium. So debate. But finally, in 2000. There's a special autonomy implemented there under President Gus Dur. We have law on regional autonomy and special autonomy for Papua. And then I go back there again because I established legal aid for women in Jayapura, and back and forth, also for training and so on. And oh my God, that's yeah, the road is improved, infrastructure improved, but look at the mama as told by Febriana, it's still there in the floor, in the street, dangerous, and selling small thing, and the yeah, other people who come from outside Papua who enjoy the benefit of development, infrastructure development there, and also the who those in power. Yeah, they get benefits immensely. I saw a beautiful house in the mountain, in the highland, and so on. Oh my God! And even there is President Palace. Pardon me?
It's so luxury house. Yeah,
yes,
it's like villa.
Yes.
I live in Bali, so I know it's even like better than any villa that I ever saw in Bali.
Yeah, but and then corruption also everywhere. When I was in the parliament, yeah, there are many Papuan people in some luxurious hotel in Jakarta. I thought they did the lobby to get a project and also, yeah, everything for their own benefit. In terms of violence against women, yeah, there is some progress in terms of regional bylaws on gender-based violence prevention and also domestic violence, but no budget. Yeah, so the patriarchal culture there is really very strong, and we started to program called Engage, the engagement of men and boy in eradicating violence against women there. But actually not in only in Papua, since women groups have a big challenge on conservatism, fundamentalism, that getting stronger and stronger, not only in the community level, but also in the parliament. So we propose like a sexual violence bill. It's already 10 years now, but still not enacted. And also a bill on the protection of domestic workers. It has already 16 years now. And then the culture of violence, yeah, also everywhere, not only state actor, state apparatus, like also happened 3 days ago. The extrajudicial killing of the Islamic Defense Front. 6 people were killed by the police, and also, yeah, in other conflict, especially agrarian conflict, land conflict, all the mining conflict, all the economic resources is controlled by oligarchs and supported by military and the police. That's economic culture of or policy of the Suharto era that continued until now. I think still very strong, and even stronger. Yeah, what can we do to the situation that human rights violation and silencing our freedom of speech, especially related to the economic inequality and social justice, like I said, in agrarian conflict, labor conflict, and so on. And also the absence of the state in the conflict, like in a week ago or 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, in Sigli, where a fundamentalist group killed a group of people in the church. Yeah, that's another problem as well. And yeah, I almost come to the conclusion that the election, general election, it's not for the welfare of the public, but for the sake of the interest of the winner or those who in power. So for the last 1 week, two minister was arrested because of corruption. And the last one, and there's a minister of social affairs who's stealing the fund for the poorest of the poor in the pandemic era. It's really brutal, brutal corruption. And also the problem of law enforcement is very weak. So that's why the culture of impunity, the culture of violence still going on, and even stronger. That was my thought. So I think the idea of 4C to strengthen the grassroots people, the grassroots activists is the right solution. So the human rights culture, not only in the world of human rights activists, but also have to be in the culture of the grassroots people. That's and of course the advocacy in the national and international fora have to be conducted as well. Yeah, like back to the issue of West Papua, I think 5 years ago, I and Saskia attended a seminar organized by International Law Group of Netherlands, who presented the research on the decline of welfare of West Papua in terms of the economic and health and social justice, and they come to the conclusion that genocide is going on in Papua. And I think I do support that conclusion. If we see the Papuan situation right now.
Yeah, let me give the floor to Professor Saskia. Let me just briefly make an observation, because you mentioned that human rights have to be become a part of our cultures, right? Because like Southeast Asia as a whole, over 500 million people, 10 plus countries if we count East Timor. And then if West Papua becomes self-determining autonomous nation, that'd be another country, right? There's nothing to be afraid of. These countries becoming, independent, autonomous, self-governing states, because this whole region was actually put together as a result of the collapse of European empires, right? That have been in the region for 150, 200, 300 years. Like in the case of Indonesia, the Dutch were there for 300 plus years. The same in the Philippines, the Spanish, the French in the Indochina, and the English in Burma and Malaysia and Singapore, right? And so the notion that a people may decide for themselves the future, the type of society that they want to build, has to be embraced and accepted, not seen as a threat, right? Because we cannot have a region where brown people, ourselves, Burmese or Indonesians or Thais or Malay, behave like white men, colonial men, and taking everything of value from other communities and putting those communities down, right? Just 2 days ago on the BBC Burmese, a Buddhist monk, a well-known monk, gave a human rights interview, 12 minutes, where he was using Buddhism to justify discrimination and treatment of women in Asia as second-class citizens, say, comparing the Burmese and other Asian women as having this, collective psyche as woman, to depend on men, unlike the European woman and North American woman. So, that's a kind of thing that, religious institutions, cultural institutions promote across Southeast Asia, whether we're talking about, Islamic countries or Buddhist countries of Southeast Asia, where women are seen as inferior humans who need to sit behind men or who need to take orders from men. Yeah. And so I think we cannot talk about, human rights and democracy in Indonesia or West Papua or Burma or across Southeast Asia unless we address the oppression of half of that 500 million population, who are women. So with that, let me just turn to Professor Saskia, retired from University of Amsterdam. Can you talk about the, your research on the sexual, women's and human rights, particularly on Indonesia, in the context of larger democratization, and also you've done massive research around the world, having published 30 books on this subject.
Yeah, thank you, Zarni. And let me first express my great pleasure to be in this eminent panel of experts. It's really a great honor for me to be here. I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is that Indonesia, the way it is now, the way it is shaped now, has a history of enormous violence, right? I mean, a Dutch researcher, Hagen, counted 400 armed conflicts from wars, really kind of like the Aceh War for 30 years, and of course the terrible occupations of Lombok and Bali. 400 of such conflicts in the whole period that the Dutch kind of went around in the archipelago. So it's the culture of violence. And then the culture of violence was continued through the brutal Japanese occupation. And then again, this extended war of liberation. And one of the consequences of this, this immense history of violence is that the culture of violence was deeply ingrained. And at the same time also a culture of aggressive nationalism was rooted in this violence, right? Particularly in the violence, in the counter-violence against the Dutch violence, right? And so when you now have the slogan NKRI Mati, it means that you want to die for the unity of Indonesia as it is now at the moment shaped, which is what you often hear from fundamentalist and right-wing groups. This is what is used to thwart and to kill and to oppress what's happening, the freedom movement in Papua, West Papua. So it is this aggressive nationalism. It is a xenophobic nationalism, which at the same time is very racist, as Ronny also already explained, very arrogant, very hierarchical, and very aggressive. And of course, I mean, during the period of Sukarno, the first democratization really started with the first national elections in '55, which were probably the most democratic in its history. But then Sukarno emerged as the leader or the initiator of the so-called non-aligned movement. Now, this was something that the US particularly was not going to allow. So from then onwards, in the context of the Cold War, Indonesia was being destabilized, and a new form of aggression came in. Both a kind of regional unrest, which took the form of revolts against the national state, which were supported by the CIA, and economic destabilization. And this again strengthened the narrow kind of nationalism that Indonesia now has. And of course, the culture of impunity. And when in 65, 66, the genocide that Noor also talked about happened, with probably 1 million people murdered. Noor and I together helped organize the International People's Tribunal on the topic. We were the first ones to speak about this in a legal way outside of Indonesia, and we were free to do that. And although it was very difficult, and we indeed established, our judges established, that the genocide has happened. But since then, no news. Since then, nobody has ever been tried, right? And I mean, there are names mentioned, but people know names. The murderers are known. There is not one murderer or torturer ever tried. And so it is this combination of the culture of impunity and the culture of violence that also make the situation in Papua so tenuous and so hard and so difficult, because the TNI, the army and the police simply are not ever going to be called to order. Noor has been protesting lately against the killings of these fundamentalist Muslims, but that is of course the same issue, right? In a country in which there is no respect for the rule of law, in which the security forces can kill or maim or torture or detain with total impunity, anybody can be detained, right, and killed or at will, because no officer ever will be called to the court. And it is this situation in which Noor also said the elections happened, and we didn't get what we had hoped for, namely people, a president, a minister, a cabinet who supported human rights, which is what actually Jokowi in the first time around promised. He never followed up on any of that. Also because the cronies during the Suharto period, the dictator period, were still in power. There was a shift in leadership, but there was never a shift in who really constituted the major power holders, the oligarchy in Indonesia. And now they are consolidating themselves. The army is forging stronger links with political parties and things and so on. And the problem is also, apart from this oligarchy, this patriarchal, hierarchical, amoral oligarchy, is that the human rights movement, and Noor also mentioned that, has been weakened. And it's particularly the electoral campaigns that have weakened us. Because instead of holding on to our own agendas, the women's agenda, the human rights agenda, the land rights agenda, or all the other agendas, we allowed ourselves to be split in the political arena. So some groups supported Jokowi and others groups supported Prabowo. And instead of fighting for their own agenda, they were fighting for the agenda of Jokowi and Prabowo, his adversary. And of course, the first thing that happened was, when everybody was totally exhausted after this campaign, is that Jokowi and Prabowo came together and divided up the spoils of this election. So that is why we call it an illiberal system. But the human rights movement itself has not proven strong enough to stick to its agenda. And this is also caused by another development, and that both Ronny and Febri and Noor also talked about. It is the lack of morality. Corruption is not seen as something deeply immoral by the religious leaders, right? It only becomes a problem when you are detained, when you are captured, right? But as long as you are corrupt and you're not captured, you are seen as a successful person. I mean, you were right, you're rich, you can drive big cars and all that, and that's fine. Whereas morality is reserved for what I call the proxy scapegoats. And the proxy scapegoats are two groups of people who are stigmatized in Indonesian society. And they are the ones who are called the sinners, right? The pendosa. And one group is the communists, the former communists. Can you imagine 80-year-old people who have been traumatized by their camp experiences, if they survive that, and LGBT people. So those two together, and sometimes they are kind of lumped together even, these are seen as the sinners in the country, whereas the corruptors and the killers and all these people who allow and condone and profit from the actions of the killers and the corruptors are left untouched. And there is no fatwa from the major ulama council that is against this. There are fatwas enough against the communists and against the LGBT community, more than enough, and everybody is up in arms about them. And the Muslim groups and all the other groups, they're fighting against them, and they're trying to criminalize all these kinds of things. But really, to try to create a rule of law in Indonesia, to try to bring an end to the culture of violence and to the culture of impunity, that is what I think a government should do. And it's not doing any of that.
Can I just come in here for 1 second? Because you talk about, the two the communities of people, LGBTQ, and the leftists and communists who attempted to essentially push for a working welfare economy that works for the people, as opposed to the oligarchs that you mentioned and their outside enablers and investors. I think this is what runs across Southeast Asia. If you look at Thailand, or if you look at Burma, that you will, or like Philippines, that you will see Catholic Church, you will see the Buddhist, Sangha, or Buddhist monarchy in Thailand, or Buddhist, order in Burma, with the Burmese politicians who call themselves Buddhists. And all of them have, at some point or others, when they are confronted with popular pressure from below, to make the states and institutions work for the people instead of the other way around. We call in Burmese, or Pali, the Mandare. Communists are the enemy of Dharma. The same applies to Thailand and their protesters. 1976, the young progressive students wanting to reform Thai institutions, they were labeled as enemies of Buddhism, enemies of Buddhist monarchy. Now you're telling me that the Ulama Council, or fundamentalist or Muslim organizations, national in Indonesia, frame communist and LGBT sexual minorities as sinners and a threat, right? While and then of course, we have a region of 500 million people, many of whom do not have opportunities either to go to school or to go on to university, or to develop a critical thinking, the way young children in other democracies will be encouraged to do. So you've got naturally, right of the center public that will rally behind the label God or religion or flag. Yeah. So that's why you've got this the splintering of human rights communities, because when we in Burma, we have been fighting for this human rights for the last 30 plus years, with Aung San Suu Kyi as the head of the human rights movement. As soon as we raise the issue of Muslims as the enemy of Buddhist Burma, or Rohingyas as Islamicists who would take a slice of Buddhist Burma, all of a sudden, human rights activists who spent 15 years in jail or 20 years in exile, are up in arms, rallying behind the state that has put them behind bars for 220 years. And so this is a universal problem. Nationalism, like poisoning the minds of Indonesians or Burmese or Thai or Malays. Yeah. And so can you tell the audience where the Indonesian democracy is heading, and why people are a bit alarmed about Jokowi maybe pursuing or establishing his dynasty? We've got, you have like dynasties in Indonesia, and the same way we have dynasties in Burma. You've got Sukarno dynasty, Megawati became the president, and then like in Philippines, the same thing, Gloria, and then the Marcoses, right? And then like in Thailand, a son of prime minister becoming prime minister, right? In Japan, right? In South Korea. We cannot have democratic societies where political dynasties dominate after generation, yeah. And you had Suharto, yeah. And now like you're having Jokowi, who was initially seen as a good guy coming from outside the political establishment.
Yeah, and he's doing the same thing. And it's becoming more and more difficult for human rights defenders or activists to contest political seats in any kind of parliament, local elections, or whatever, because the campaigns are prohibitively expensive. And there is this cronyism between political leaders and economic interests. They may fund your campaign, some of them, but then of course you've got to pay back. So it's almost impossible for people who are not corrupt to get themselves into political power, and that is only getting worse. It's only getting worse. Because I mean now you've got to pay your buzzers, you've got to pay your army of online trolls, you've got to pay this, that, and the other. It's impossible for well-meaning people to conduct, almost impossible, a campaign. So this is really becoming a major problem, and it's not only so we get this infighting between various dynasties, because the previous president SBY also has a son waiting in the wings. Megawati has a daughter, and perhaps also somebody else waiting in the wings. So everybody has kind of their own science waiting in the wings. But around that is a group of cronies who even have amassed in the shadows more political power and more economic power. I mean, the kingmaker of Jokowi is Luhut Panjaitan, a former general who has enormous coal mines in various parts of the country. And of course, Prabowo, the adversary of Jokowi, Hashim, his younger brother, also has enormous coal reserves and other lands and palm oil and all that, because that is another issue in Papua too. Papua is suffering from a law that was introduced by the Dutch, the Domeinverklaring, in which all kind of land that could not be declared the particular property of a particular person or group of persons is state property, right? Well, of course, in tribal communities, you have your big group of land, but you don't have your land papers, right? And so all that land is declared state land, and the state land is being leased out to these cronies who are close to the political power holders, and the land is being carved up, and there is instead, and the rate of deforestation in Indonesia is one of the highest, if not the highest, in the world, and that's happening in Papua too, and people are selling the land.
Yeah, I mean, can you talk about the the continuation of this deeply colonial nature of state institutions and laws, right? Because as you know, like the Dutch invented this political state over the 300 years, the same way the British invented the Burmese political state, right? And land alienation, yeah, was one of the major first acts after the colonization of these places by European powers, right? It's no, the resources are no longer shared across communities. I'm not romanticizing, you know, the humane and golden past that existed, you know, or that is believed to be existed, to have existed before the European colonial powers arrived. But I think obviously what we have inherited is the political form of organization that was set up not to help the people that belong within that organization, but to benefit, protect, and advance the interest of the political ruling class, whether they are brown or white, whatever their face looked. You know, they all behave the same way. You talk about this marriage of wealthy classes and, you know, armed organizations and the military leaders using this post-independence state to continue the internal colonial, exploitative, and repressive policies. Can you comment on that, on the Indonesian state and what it was like under the Dutch and what it is now?
Well, the Dutch, of course, started by monopolizing trade, right? I mean, that was their first goal. They set out, they controlled the harbors. They didn't control the hinterland. They controlled the harbors to monopolize trade. And then you see an interesting phenomenon in which inter-island trade, which of course was all around, is all of a sudden called smuggling, right? So that is the trade of the people themselves is called smuggling. And so you see the total change of the discourse in which the rights of the people are all the time called something bad. And for the interests of the power holders, the colonial power holders, that is seen as something good, right? For the welfare, I mean, even the word welfare is used, right? I mean, the Dutch in some moments used the welfare of the people as a goal of some kind of extractive policies. So when you see the sources of income changing from the trade in pepper and cloves and whatever to more extractive policies, when coffee and tea and particularly sugar brought up a lot of profit, then you see the expropriation of the people and the forced labor of the farmers, and enormous starvation coming up after that. And only then you see the control over the country, right? So the first 150 years of Dutch colonization were not really a period of colonization, but more in controlling the trade. Only after what is the so-called Java War, 1830, then really Holland started to consolidate its power over the land as well. And of course, as a last area of land, Papua was added. And all the time you see how the discourse kind of puts the colonial power holders or any kind of power holders as the good people, and the ones who are fighting for the rights and the interests of the indigenous people themselves are seen as insurgents, communists, or immoral people or whatever. And the present government does the same thing. If now you say that I don't like or I object to the corona policy, for instance, which is a total disaster in Indonesia, you are being accused of committing makar, treason against the president, right? Because you criticize him. And one of the laws now that is vastly used is the information and technology law, in which any kind of comment that is not favorable to the present government can be seen as inciting against whatever, against the government. And this, of course, goes back to the very old Dutch laws on haatzij, so-called haatzij, the incitement to hatred, which the Dutch used to exile Sukarno and Hatta and Shahrir and other nationalist leaders, for instance, to Digul, they were exiled to Papua in the 20s and 30s. And so you see a continuation of particular practices. You see a continuation of legal practices, which is land law, for instance. You see a continuation of practices of political surveillance. But you also see a continuation of cultural practices. And I use that post-colonial amnesia, in which particular forms of colonial rule, like the bourgeois morality, in which women had to be housewives, and in which homosexuality and particularly sodomy was seen as something unnatural, came to be seen as the natural order of that society, whereas pre-colonial aspects of culture, like dances and shaman and religious rituals, were seen as pagan and wild. And the present day leaders, they now say, and that's why I call it post-colonial amnesia, like LGBT, for instance, we don't have that in Indonesia. It's an invention from the West, whereas if you look at it, homophobia is actually an introduction from the West, right? There was no form of homophobia, overt homophobia, legal homophobia in the archipelago before the Dutch came. And all other kinds of cross-dressing on gender diverse practices are now seen again by the post-colonial power holders as alien to the original cultures. So you see a total distortion of the pre-colonial situation for the ends of the post-colonial power holders, what you call the brown leaders. And this is really a very perverse situation, which is being played out in the cultural field in order to ignore and to cover up what is going out in the economic and political field. And that is, I think, dangerous, and we should not let ourselves be deceived by that.
Yeah, we are on an hour 30 marks, and I'm happy to extend it to another 15 minutes because it's such a rich discussion. And I actually want to invite the other panelists, to come in and comment on various aspects that they think are crucial for the viewers to take away. I mean, for me, as a Burmese, I feel that I am learning tremendously from this conversation, because as a member of a Southeast Asian community, in terms of my root, I knew more about Donald Trump and what is happening within the American democracy, and how many billions are spent on buying TV ads to win elections, or what's happening in European Union. But I hardly learned anything through my education about a dual function of the Indonesian military, which has become a model for the Burmese military, right? I mean, we're looking at one of the largest countries on earth, 300 plus million population, with 20 plus thousand islands, the archipelago, the largest Muslim community as a nation, right? And hardly, the Burmese don't know much about Indonesia. That's why I think, this sort of conversation is so crucial, because, Brother Ronny, you talk about using music as a cultural movement, right? To spread the awareness around the world about the right to self-determination for your people. But I think we need to start this kind of a consciousness raising or shifting movements across Southeast Asia, instead of looking at, okay, well, he's a West Papuan fighting for self-determination. I'm a Rohingya trying to defend my community against further genocide in Burma. We need to start seeing the parallels and connections. And Indonesian state and Burmese state and militaries, they have very close ties. They cooperate. And it will be foolish and unstrategic for us as people of oppressed communities not to communicate, and not to learn from each other. So that's my last word. And but do free to comment in any order among the four of you.
Yes. Who will go first?
You.
Oh, I just would like add of what Saskia has already said on political dynasty and role of oligarch in Indonesian politics. The Indonesian Corruption Watch has already launched a report based on their research that 262 members of parliament are businessmen or women, or around 45.5% of out of 575 member of parliament are businessmen or women. And yesterday we finished with the regional election for 376 candidates all over Indonesia, and there's also research on that, and it is found that 931 companies, mainly from mining company, who affiliated to the candidate of mayor or head of district. So you could imagine from that political situation who will benefit from that election. That's one thing that I want to add. And on the political dynasty, this I think is a bit different. Megawati get her power after reformasi, I think, not in the era of his father in power. No, and even in the Suharto era, Suharto didn't prepare for her children to be his successor. Only at the end of his administration, I remember that Mbak Tutut, his older sister, became a minister of social affairs only for 2 months or 3 months, 3 months at a time, and then he stepped down. And only in the Jokowi era, when he is still as a president, his son and his son-in-law now won the election of mayor of Solo and also mayor of Medan. That's the difference between what you said, a dynasty, political dynasty in Indonesia since Sukarno, Suharto, or even SBY. When he was a president, he didn't ask his son or his family to be his successor. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the different. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, that our challenge is very big. Yeah, oligarchy, fundamentalism, political identity politics. That's really need to be addressed systematically, and we have to hand in hand with all of Southeast Asia human rights and pro-democratic activists working together to raise awareness, to do advocacy. And of course, the specific issue of a local community or regional community have to be addressed too. Yeah. That's all. Thanks, Febriana.
Yeah, I'm personally, I just want to highlight that I'm so happy that we include the discussion on West Papua issue. From the first meeting of our 4C in Bandung, I raised my hand, and if we talk about human rights in Indonesia, we have to talk about West Papua. So I'm happy that I'm hoping that this intersectional discussion about the human rights across Southeast Asia always include this kind of group that very marginalized and don't even have a voice. Even in international publication, it is hard to publish such a story because the correspondent in Indonesia is afraid that they are going to be expelled. That's why I travel here, but I only have two hands. Writing a story, and writing one story can spend like 2 months. Right now I spend like 1.5 months in West Papua. Finally I just filed the story today. And then also like we need like more representation here, like not only from West Papuan but also not only from Ronny, who is a male West Papuan activist, but also female West Papuan activists. They also have serious problem here, challenging. And then I just follow their event on the anti-violence day, series of celebration here, a commemoration or celebration here. And then also like from the not only, I think every single marginalized group have to be included in discussion here, especially the one who is very oppressed, like Rohingya, like West Papuan, and also Timor Leste. I think we need to include them. I learned a lot. Like I told to Karoni that this is like great opportunity because we found like we feel like when a Rohingya activist feel like in the same page with the West Papuan activists, it's good for solidarity, and then we can talk this like in not only in national level, because Indonesian politic, Indonesian foreign politic, it's very they are very like sensitive and responsive to Rohingyans issue. They have this statement always, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, Rohingyan, Palestinian. But when it's come to West Papuan, in like international community, in UN meeting, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, they didn't even release or give a statement on that. They always say that, oh, this is our like internal or domestic issue, so we have to address it when Vanuatu, for example, raise the issue in UN General Assembly, and then Indonesia like tried so hard to stop from talking about it. So this is great opportunity. I say to Kak Ronny that if the UN meeting cannot facilitate this discussion, just like invite so many activists from the marginalized group and give like, for example, right now I think the most important issue that we always forget is West Papuan and Rohingya, for example. So yeah, I think also for like young generation, for me it give a hope, because I'm very tired. Like I'm reporting a lot from West Papua, and I'm very tired. It's actually I'm mirroring my trauma for the 1965 event because my family was a victim, is a victim of that event. It's still related, and I see like so many young generation here has the same trauma with me, with what happened right now. It's happening, like the killing, the shooting, and they lost their family. So yeah, and I think like more, not only one female or male activists, but as I want like I think so many young activists in Thailand, in Malaysia could join the conversation in the future. Yeah, that's
Yeah, I
for
mean, like
me.
in the future, we will definitely have a region-wide online discussion if the pandemic is still not ended. That we are coming to the end of 2020. But on what you talk about, the Indonesian foreign ministries saying that West Papua issue is domestic or internal. That's the same thing that you hear from the Burmese official, like genocide is an internal affair. So I think that, like last week, I had this long conversation on this forum with the former defense and foreign minister, Tan Sri Albar. He was very candid, saying that ASEAN, they tiptoe around these issues and that they would not mention like even the word human rights or Rohingya or anything in any type of summit statements. The ASEAN had a ministerial meeting, foreign ministers meetings, last 2 weeks ago with the European Union's 27 foreign ministers. And, ASEAN and European Union presented in the statement as a shared value community. But, the crucial words like human rights or like, genocide, they're missing. They're actually not missing. They were deliberately left out. And so what we have is a situation where two major obstacles within the region. One is the ASEAN as a club of largely authoritarian heads of states of 10 countries. That's why we don't use the word ASEAN as activists. We use the word regional term Southeast Asia, right? And secondly, the ASEAN hides behind this sovereignty language. And the sovereignty that they use is 300 plus years old, the Westphalian model, where Europe was, a cluster of kingdoms fighting to kill one another, stealing land and looting and using communities as forced laborers. So, Westphalian agreements essentially said, do what you want within the boundaries of your kingdom to the communities that live there, kill them, maim them, rape them, exploit them, as long as you guarantee free flow of trade and exchange of goods between European kingdoms. That's your sovereignty. So that is the ASEAN's model of absolutist sovereignty. And they are using that sovereignty as an instrument against communities like West Papuans or Rohingyas or like Patani Thais, in southern. And so I think this is so crucial that we move away from the language of states and sovereignty to the language of peoples, the right to self-determination, revive the language of national liberations. Don't use the word insurgents or rebels, or grant states a priority, legitimacy. Yeah. And so, Ronny, you are going to come in and, I want,
So you continue.
No. I'm finished. I just wanted to say that we've got a larger picture of ASEAN states using the language of sovereignty and also the failed international order of states, I mean, you study diplomacy. We do not have an international relations. We have interstate relations. There are thousands of ethnic nations with kinship systems and linguistic affinities, but you do not have self-determination. We have political states that have lumped all these nations deserving of self-determination and controlling them. And the United Nations has endorsed the system. UN Charter explicitly states that, you know, that the sovereignty is a crucial or cornerstone of this world order, post-World War. And, you know, that is why states like Indonesia that committed genocide and that colonized West Papua or the East Timor-Leste now, or the Burmese state, saying that these are internal affairs, domestic affairs, don't interfere. You see what I mean? And then so this is the larger political structural obstacle that we all run into. That is why we are not going to, you know, change these like warlike structures. We need to build a grassroots movements among ourselves. That's why, you know, like people like Martin Luther King took stands against, you know, Israeli occupation of Palestine. You know, in 1964, the last speech he gave in New York was about this indivisibility of justice, and that's why he famously left a quote, observation. You know, no one is free unless everyone is free. That is the spirit behind our work in the 4C.
Thank you. Yeah, totally echo what you also are saying there. And if we look at 2020 marks the end of the third decade in eradicating colonialism. And what we're seeing within the UN mechanism, where the C24 decolonization committee, the, the powers within the Security Council are now in the conversation around dissolving that committee, particular committee. Yet they've got at least 17 non-self-governing territories listed. And with West Papua case and other cases like Rohingya, these are not listed. And these are regarded as the second degree self-determination struggle. And within that UN mechanism itself, we're seeing like who really established that. After the Second World War, we know that these are the victors of the Second World War, and they will maintain any power to making sure that their interest, whether it's strategic, geopolitical interest, will go first. And if it comes with those economic interests, places that they can benefit most are the war zones, conflict zones around the world. And as you pointed out earlier as well, and with West Papua, it's more than just gold and nickel and copper. Like gold, yes, second largest, copper is the largest. And we've got the Bintuni gas. Chevron did an expedition, and then they're about to sign up another contract to extend that. We've got the BP oil in Sorong, logging companies from Southeast Asia mostly, including Australia and New Zealand, are very much involved or entangled. We've got one of the biggest nickel coming out from Raja Ampat straight to Cairns port up here, supplying one of the richest and richest person, but also politician Clive Palmer, which the nickel coming straight from Raja Ampat, and then the flora and fauna. But coming back to really underline the very conversations we're saying, the conflict and the issues in different regions, we're talking about the same powers that are in control of the UN system, which has established this systemic violence, aggression, and of course, culture of impunity, which other speakers have highlighted. And our voice in this space within those intergovernmental or the global fora is also limited. With West Papua case on human rights issue alone in the Pacific Island leaders, the solidarity movement and the network have been pushing on human rights, let alone just for the visit of the UN Human Rights Commissioner to visit the region. This was a communique came out from the Pacific leaders in 2019 for that visit. This is prior when the COVID hit early this year. But up until now, Indonesia has buy time and has not finalized the visit of that of the UN Human Rights Commissioner, and even playing it down to a visit from Bangkok, as someone from the office there to pay a visit. But this is also disrespecting and playing into the sovereignty card, and we see that across any UN member state, any government, they will use the sovereignty card as a playoff or a trade-off for whether it's bilateral or multilateral agreement. And so it comes down to the voice of the people, solidarity with the people is critical, which everyone has highlighted here. And together, when we're unified, then we are powerful to really challenge the system. Like in Indonesia at large, for West Papua case, the systemic racism is evident, and this is where anyone, the religious intolerance, let alone peaceful demonstration with the new laws that are being put forward, particularly in Indonesia. Last September, government passed a bill for increasing the role of military. So the concept of securitization is now what the Army, the Navy, the Air Force together combined. They've got 3 strategic military commands throughout the region, one in Riau, one in Kalimantan, and one in Papua, Biak Island. And they will be the first response team when it comes to health situation or emergency situation. Even with the COVID, the military are the ones that will respond to that. And this is evident in West Papua. So we are seeing increasing deployment of military to the region, one to meet in terms of the increasing hotspots, which there's new places that they found new gold and mining blocks that they're going to open. The military are playing the big role. So there's no report up until to date of the rotation of the military, the security forces, those that have spent 6 to 9 months coming out. But every time we're reading in the media, it's military have been deployed. But they use this framework of securitization to send more troops. So on the ground, evidently it's 1 to 10. One civilian Papuan is equivalent to at least 10 military on the ground. So that's the presence, and it created psychological trauma as well, just to see the massive police trucks that are going around every day. Even yesterday, when people wanted to come out to celebrate or commemorate Human Rights Day, there's no human rights of such or democracy exists even in West Papua.
Can I invite Professor Saskia to have her last final thoughts on the issues that we discussed, and then we will end our essentially 2 hours discussion. Very, very rich. So thank you to everybody.
Well, I fully agree with whatever has been said, and I'm very happy to meet Ronny here. I think the cultural struggle and the diplomatic struggle is vitally important, and of course the journalistic work that Febri is doing is wonderful. I mean, There are so few journalists around. And of course, the legal aid work that Noor and her group is doing is great. And just as a last thing of how things are going in West Papua, even the development effort that is being promoted so much. I mean, the Indonesian government bringing development, right, to Papua. That's what they're saying all the time. Well, the health infrastructure, which I would say is a vital element of development, is totally insufficient. People are dying wherever they can. And if there is COVID, there is no preparation whatsoever. But the roads, of course, are being developed. And why are the roads being developed? Infrastructure? Well, extraction, yeah, for the companies, and of course for troop transport. And so everything is geared towards militarization, securitization, and extraction. And I think it's a great shame to see this happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, as some of you know, we are working also on the first ever online exhibition, to capture the memories of the victims of various genocides and other atrocity crimes that have been committed by Southeast Asia's leading states such as Indonesia, Burma, Cambodia, and to a lesser extent Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand. And so I think West Papua will be one of the prominent section of this the Southeast Asia's crimes. And to remind the viewers, despite whatever ASEAN has been talking about, harmony and all that, we are a region that has witnessed, like massive international crimes, no less than genocide. The genocides in Indonesia in 1965, the genocide in Cambodia in the mid-1970s, Cambodia, Khmer Rouge genocide, and then the current genocide that is not finished yet in Burma against the Rohingya people. With this thought, as dark as it may sound, we are trying to preserve the memory and honor the victims that have suffered and that continue to suffer state repression across Southeast Asia. I want to thank all the distinguished panelists, and we are going to close this dialogue. And if any of you wish to suggest, the dialogues on Southeast Asian communities, please drop us a note at 4C.co website. And thanks again, and have a great evening in West Papua, and also good afternoon in the Netherlands. Okay, bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Ronnie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello,
Thank
Ronnie.
you, everyone.